Hello again, and welcome to the Creative Writing Workshop podcast. The theme of this podcast is escaping our responsibilities. You'll need a pen and paper or the notes up on your phone because this podcast is all about getting words down on the page and developing your own writing practice. The form is a little bit different today, but if you're a regular listener, I'll explain what we're doing and why we're doing it a bit differently. The subtitle of this episode is Hang Spring Cleaning. And it's all about characters who shirk their responsibilities and dash off to have a great time. It can be a delicious moment when a character should do something and chooses not to. It's particularly prevalent this moment in children's and young adult literature because part of growing up is understanding your responsibilities, and part of being young is resenting them and maybe not quite understanding them. However, it can be really fun when someone with a lot of duty in their life just veers off course and decides to put themselves first. And a lot of grown up literature has these moments or themes when someone who perhaps hasn't centered their own fulfillment or pleasure in a more mature life decides suddenly to do so. I'm recording this on the Easter bank holiday weekend, and so I think that's why differences between the feeling of a holiday and working are at the top of my mind. Today, I've been given permission by my society to be idle because it's a bank holiday. Um, but sometimes holidays can be more delicious if we take them when we're not really supposed to be doing so. At its best, I sort of think that this is what writing can feel like the abandonment of our responsibilities and the centering of our own desire for art and self-expression and storytelling and creating characters and building worlds and experiencing that adrenaline rush of writing. So I'm going to change the usual format today. Um, and instead of a warm up and guided prompts, I'm going to invite you to jump in and keep going, abandoning whatever you should be doing, whether that's dusting or life admin, and just committing to the pleasure of writing for an hour or so without any thought of anything other than the fun of it. And, even without my voice to kind of prompt or guide or help shape your work. I'll add some reflection questions to the show notes. So if you want to, you can reflect at the end, but you might not want to. You might want to just write for the sheer pleasure of writing. And one of the ways into this kind of headspace is to remember how fun it was to read and write stories as a child when things were maybe a bit more fun before we had grown up responsibilities. So I'm going to read a piece of writing that might be familiar to many people from their childhood. It's one of the great moments in literature for me of a character beginning their adventure by throwing down their responsibilities and going off to have fun. A great metaphor for writing as a passion. So while I read, which should last about, I think maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes, just note down anything that you can use as a jumping off point for your own writing. But I am going to follow up afterwards with a few ideas for you just to kick you off and get you started. Now, for people who don't recognise this piece, and I'm sure that lots and lots of people will, this is the opening of a book called The Wind in the Willows. And the characters are referred to by animal names, and it's a children's book, and they are literally animals. Here we go. The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring cleaning his little home. First with brooms, and then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash, till he had dust in his throat and eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur, and an aching back and weary arms. Spring was moving in the air above, and in the earth below and around him, penetrating even his dark and lowly little house with its spirit of divine discontent and longing. It was small wonder then that he'd suddenly flung down his brush on the floor and said, "Bother," and "Oh, blow," and also "Hang spring cleaning," and bolted out of the house without even waiting to put on his coat. Something above was calling him imperiously, and he made for the steep little tunnel which answered, in his case, to the gravelled carriage drive owned by animals whose residences are nearer to the sun and air. So he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged, and then he scrooged again and scrabbled and scratched and scraped, working busily with his little paws and muttering to himself, up we go, till at last, pop, his snout came out into the sunlight, and he found himself rolling in the warm grass of a great meadow. "This is fine," he said to himself. "This is better than whitewashing." Sunshine struck his hot fur, soft breezes caressed his heated brow, and after the seclusion of cellarage he had lived in so long, the carol of happy birds fell on his dulled hearing almost like a shout. Jumping off on all his four legs at once, in the joy of living and the delight of spring without its cleaning, he pursued his way across the meadow until he reached the hedge on the further side. "Hold up," said an elderly rabbit at the gap. "Sixpence for the privilege of passing by the private road." He was bowled over in an instant by the impatient and contemptuous mole, who trotted along the side of the hedge, chaffing the other rabbits as they peeped hurriedly from their holes to see what the row was about. Onion sauce," he remarked jeeringly, and was gone before they could think of a thoroughly satisfactory reply. Then they all started grumbling at each other. "How stupid you are! Why didn't you tell him? Well, why didn't you say? You might have reminded him," and so on in the usual way. But of course it was then much too late, as is always the case. It all seemed too good to be true. Hither and thither through the meadows he rambled busily along the hedgerows, across the copses, finding everywhere birds building, flowers budding, leaves thrusting, everything happy and progressive and occupied. And instead of having an uneasy conscience pricking him and whispering, "Whitewash," he somehow could only feel how jolly it was to be the only idle dog among these busy citizens. After all, the best part of a holiday is perhaps not so much to be resting yourself as to see all the other fellows busy working. So that's the opening of Wind in the Willows, and the main character of plenty of this story, Mole, literally throws down his brush. So he performs a physical action that expresses his state of mind. Where could your writing start? I'm going to give you 4 ideas. And the first one is perhaps you could take that physical action as a symbol of or an expression of state of mind. You could have a character that physically lays down their tools and walks away. You could begin their adventure there. Another idea is that we also have this moment where the rabbit tries to make the mole pay a toll for accessing the road. So he says, "Sixpence for the privilege of passing by the private road." If you'd like to begin a piece of writing with a moment of conflict, then perhaps that could be really fun. So you could have someone who abandons their responsibility, but the first thing they come across isn't joyful freedom, but actually some other kind of cost or barrier that they must navigate or escape. A third idea might be from this quote: "Jumping off all his four legs at once in the joy of living and the delight of spring without its cleaning." So we often talk about creating conflict and problems for our characters. Um, and in a novel, we do certainly need those. But it can be really hard in our normal everyday lives just to kick back and properly relax, switching off from ideas of productivity or achievement or ambition. That can be its own kind of struggle. So perhaps today you could write about a character who simply enjoys themselves and just see where that takes you. Just somebody having a great time. A fourth idea is from this quote: "The best part of a holiday is perhaps not so much to be resting yourself as to see all the other fellows busy working." There's a nice kind of um, conflict of situation there, isn't there? Why don't we think about writing a very idle character watching someone else work? Whether you in your daily life are someone who tends to watch others work, or maybe someone who carries burdens and works hard, and it's irritating to be that more people don't help. There's a lot there to unpack, I think, in terms of um, blame and responsibility and relationships. So there's plenty of places that could go. An idle character who watches someone else work. And now I'd invite you to begin writing as if this was a warm up. So just put down one word after another. Don't worry about spelling or grammar or pace or consistency or tone or tense or voice. Maybe the beginning of this will be absolute gobbledygook. Just Gradually let the words take you out of your own head so that you exist only on the page. And if the prompt you begin with doesn't work for you, you can go back and listen to them again and try a different one. You're not trying to achieve anything, so there's nothing to be frustrated about. I invite you to be a child with a toy box. So if one thing doesn't hold your attention, you can throw it over your shoulder and pick something else out. And finally, before I shirk my responsibility of getting a podcast out over the weekend and disappear off to spend the day writing, if you don't have anything yet from the kind of quotes and ideas that we've discussed, I would perhaps think about carrying on this sentence and see where it takes you. And this is obviously taken from the piece that I just read. He pursued his way across the meadow until... I'll read it again. He pursued his way across the meadow until...